I'll explain the overhaul procedure of fuel injection pump. Handle the fuel injection pump with care because it has been made precisely in order to display a combustion and governor performance. Prepare the exclusive tool to overhaul the engine. Firstly, remove the relative pipes. Secondly, loosen the bolt of delivery valve. Thirdly, loosen the tightening nut of fuel injection pump with the exclusive socket wrench. Detach the supporting nut of fuel rack and then remove the pump. I'll explain the disassembly procedure of fuel injection pump. Disassemble the fuel injection pump as you are watching in the video. Prepare the exclusive tool to overhaul the fuel injection pump. Turn the fuel injection pump to 180 degrees on the table and set the exclusive tool to draw out the plunger guide on the rear side of flung in the fuel injection pump body. Turn the support bolt of exclusive tool to clockwise and hold the plunger guide. Remove the circlip for stopper of plunger guide while holding it. Rise the plunger guide by the spring force when turning the support bolt of tool to counterclockwise. After detaching tool, it is possible to remove the plunger guide, spring sheet, plunger, spring, retainer, and pinion together. Detach the rack lock bolt and remove the rack. Remove the deflector which is set to the center of fuel injection pump. There are two deflectors. Next, detach the support bolt of delivery valve with the hexagonal wrench and remove the delivery valve and square ring. Be careful not to lose parts of delivery valve because they are too small. Finally, detach the bolt of barrel holder and remove the barrel from the pump body. O-ring is equipped at the barrel position of fuel injection pump, so make sure to remove it. The overhaul of fuel injection pump will be completed. Wash the disassembled parts and check for abnormality. Be careful not to damage it during washing. After checking, reassemble it with the necessary parts replacement. Replace all O-rings. Reassemble the fuel injection pump in inverse order for disassembly. Assemble the barrel body. Tighten the bolts of barrel guard and of delivery valve evenly in 3 steps by the specified torque. Furthermore, install the deflector on both sides. Align the set marks of rack, pinion, and plunger. Pay attention for the set marks and then assemble them. Equip the rack and fit the stopper bolt of rack. Turn the pump 180 degrees and install the pinion on the fuel injection pump. At this time, make sure to align the set mark of rack and of pinion. Insert the spring and retainer. Next, insert the plunger. Make sure to align the set mark of pinion and plunger. After applying lube oil on the outside of plunger guide, temporarily insert it into the fuel injection pump. Set the inserting tool of plunger guide. In the same procedure as drawing out plunger guide, turn the pushing bolt of exclusive tool to clockwise and push the plunger guide. And then install the retainer and fix the plunger guide. Align the retainer cut with body notch and the assembly will be completed. After assembly, check if the rack moves smoothly. Install the fuel injection pump to the engine body with the tightening nut. Return each pipe to its original condition. After the procedure, check for timing of fuel injection and bleed air. Check the injection timing as the following procedure. Turn the flywheel and align the marked off line on the body of fuel injection pump with it on the plunger guide. The scale graduation pointed out by the flywheel pointer at this time indicates the fuel injection timing. And also, overhaul the pump bracket including tappet and roller once per 8,000 to 10,000 hours. I'll explain the overhaul procedure of air cooler every 4,000 to 5,000 hours. This engine is a unit structure of air cooler and turbocharger table. The core of air cooler is cylindrical type and it is equipped with 2 cores. It is a feature which is possible to draw out only core to both sides during maintenance. Firstly, detach the cooling water pipe at the inlet and outlet of cooling water and bypass valve. Furthermore, remove the tank and O-ring at both sides. When washing the tube of cooling water side, brush the tube with a long handle brush. When washing the fin of air side, push and draw out the core. Wash the detached core. Clean the fin on the air side with steam or cleaning fluid. After that, blow the compressed air and finally wash it by water. Check the coating in the inner surface of the boost air duct and of its tank. If the coating has peeled off, repair it. Check for clogging of drain hole. Reassemble the air cooler in inverse order for disassembly. Replace all packing and O-rings. Make sure to set the water return board. Align the stamp mark O of cooler core with the set mark of body when installing the cooler core.
Disassemble and service the turbocharger every 4,800 hours. Prepare these replacement parts before servicing. Prepare the tools for disassembly in advance. Prepare the general tools shown in the list. Prepare these accessory tools for the turbocharger. Prepare these tools for making the necessary measurements. Prepare these special tools. Click the Order Form button in the menu to order and prepare special tools in advance. Now let's look at the disassembly procedures. Before starting disassembly, put on a helmet, safety glasses, earplugs, safety gloves, and shoes. Before removing the turbocharger, cool the engine for about 4 hours after stopping operation. First, measure the exhaust flexible joint. Measure the installation size H and the displacement distance at a right angle to the shaft X at the 4 positions shown. Check that the measured values are almost identical to those shown on the record sheet and enter your values on the sheet. Remove the turbocharger from the engine. The cover is best removed too, to make it easier to remove the turbocharger. Remove the bolt at the exhaust inlet, the bolt at the exhaust outlet, and the installation foot bolt. In the case of the RH133, remove the blower casing set bolt. The joint bolts of the turbocharger and the exhaust output pipe should not be loosened yet. Install the lifting fixture and remove the turbocharger. Lift with care. Now let's look at how to disassemble the turbocharger. The installation angle of the turbocharger casing depends on the engine assembly. Mark the alignment position for the compressor and turbine casings before starting disassembly. Stand the turbocharger on its turbine side. Remove the silencer. Take care not to damage the steel mesh while removing the silencer. Next is removal of the compressor housing. Take care not to damage the compressor impeller while removing the housing. Place the turbocharger on its side and measure the turbine rotor clearance. To measure the thrust clearance, push the compressor impeller to the turbine side and set the dial to 0. Then push the impeller to the compressor side and read the dial. This value is the thrust clearance. To measure the radial clearance, set the dial to 0 at the end of the compressor impeller. Then press the compressor side of the turbine rotor upwards and read the dial again. Next, press the compressor side downwards and read the new value. The total of the upper and lower values is the radial clearance. Make this measurement about 3 times and take the average values. Check that the average is within the range allowed in the table. Next, measure the exhaust casing clearance. Measure the clearance at 4 positions and check that the measured values exceed the values listed in the table. If the clearance is smaller, the turbine wheel will come in contact with the casing. After measurement, enter the results on the record sheet. In the case of inspections every 2400 hours, an overhaul is needed if any of the 4 measured clearances fails to correspond to the listed clearance. Click Disassembly 2. If all values are within the allowable range, click Assembly 2. Install the turbine rotor fastening tool onto the gas outlet flange of the turbine housing. For more convenient reassembly of the compressor impeller, mark the alignment position on the threads and nut. Remove the shaft end nut. This has a left-hand thread, so turn it clockwise for removal. Pull out the compressor impeller. If it is hard to remove, heat the impeller with a dryer or other device before removal. Do not knock the shaft end with a hammer or other tool. After making an alignment mark, remove the hexagonal bolts fastening the sealing plate. Use the 2 bolts just removed as puller bolts to remove the sealing plate and oil thrower together. Remove the anti-side thrust collar. Use the 2 hexagonal bolts which fasten the sealing plate as puller bolts to remove the thrust bearing. Remove the distance piece. Remove the direct side thrust collar. Remove the O-ring. Next is removal of the turbine housing. First, remove the hexagonal bolts. Apply penetrant to the spigot joint of the turbine housing. A bolt interferes at the base of the installation foot. Turn the housing to remove it. These bolts are heat resistant. Separate them from the others. Place the turbocharger upside down to remove the turbine housing. Place the turbocharger on a proper mount so that the end of the rotor shaft does not strike the top of the table. Put a wire through the turbine rotor fastener and remove the turbine housing with a crane. If it is hard to remove, knock around the perimeter of the housing lightly with a plastic hammer. Take care not to damage the turbine wheel. Remove the turbine rotor. Take care not to damage the turbine shaft. In the case of the RH-133, remove the metal sealing gasket. Remove the heat insulator. If it is hard to remove, knock it lightly with a plastic hammer. Now remove the turbine side seal ring from the turbine rotor with the seal ring pliers. Be sure to replace the seal ring upon reassembly. Remove the oil thrower from the compressor impeller side sealing plate that was removed just a moment ago. Remove the compressor side seal ring from the oil thrower with the seal ring pliers. Next is disassembly of the bearing. First, the turbine side. Remove the snap ring with the snap ring pliers. Remove the floating bearing. Remove the compressor side snap ring and the floating bearing. This completes disassembly of the turbocharger. We will next explain how to clean the turbocharger. Hard carbon accumulates on the turbine housing shroud and turbine wheel. Imperfect cleaning upsets the balance of the rotor shaft, so be sure to remove all of the carbon. Use the powerful Curry Pearl YF2 cleaning agent for the turbocharger. Curry Pearl consists of 2 agents, A and B. Read the instructions printed on the package before using the Curry Pearl. Put water into the containers and prepare 20% solutions of agents A and B. Stir them well. Apply grease to the bearing and seal ring in advance to prevent rusting. Heat the cleaning solution to 60 to 70 degrees Celsius and submerge the exhaust casing, rotor shaft, and heat insulator in it. Submerge the parts for more than 4 hours. After removing the parts from the cleaning solution, wash them with water and rub them lightly with a nylon brush or similar tool to remove any residue. Wash the compressor impeller, compressor casing, and bearing housing with cleaning oil. Contamination of the seal ring in particular can cause oil leakage or bearing damage. Be very careful not to damage this part when cleaning. After cleaning, check the cleaned items carefully. Measure the width of the seal ring groove on the turbine rotor shaft with the slide calipers. The illustration on the left shows a rotor shaft that can still be used. The worn part shown on the right has reduced sealing performance. In such a case, we recommend replacement of the rotor shaft. Enter the measured results on the record sheet. Check by hand that the shaft end nut can be screwed lightly onto the bottom threads. Check that some coating remains in the gas passage. Here we will explain the reassembly procedures. First, install the bearing. The reassembly procedures depend on the type of bearing, so check the bearing type. First, let's look at reassembly of a semi-floating bearing. This is the compressor side. Fully apply lube oil to the new floating bearing before placing it in the bearing housing. Reassemble so that the notch on the bearing end face is deeply inserted, so that the pin is securely positioned in the notch in the bearing housing. Install the snap ring onto the bearing housing with the snap ring pliers. Install the snap ring with the rounded face directed towards the bearing side. Point the end gap of the snap ring to the right, as seen from the compressor side. Install the bearing on the turbine side in the same way. Install the snap ring with its end gap pointing to the left, as seen from the turbine side. After installing the snap ring, check that the semi-floating bearing has the appropriate clearance in both the shaft and rotational directions. Next, let's look at reassembly of a full floating bearing. The full floating bearing has a free orientation. It can be reassembled pointing in either direction. Place the rounded side of the snap ring facing the bearing side, and point the end gap downwards on both the turbine and compressor sides. Next, install the seal ring. Install the compressor side seal ring onto the oil thrower with the seal ring pliers. The end gap of the seal ring is gas tight. Install the turbine side seal ring onto the turbine rotor with the seal ring pliers. The end gap of this seal ring is straight. Straight seal rings are used interchangeably for both sides on all models except the RH133. Prepare the bearing housing for the next assembly step. Place the turbocharger on its compressor side on an appropriate block so that the rotor shaft end does not come in contact with the top of the table. Install the heat insulator onto the bearing housing. Now let's look at installation of the turbine rotor shaft. Apply lube oil to the journal of the turbine rotor shaft before reassembly. Face the end gap of the turbine side seal ring upwards and assemble it from the vertical direction. In the case of the RH133, install the metal sealing gasket between the heat insulator and turbine housing. Now install the turbine housing. Take care not to damage the turbine wheel. Install the turbine side stop plate and heat-resistant hexagonal bolts that were kept apart during disassembly. Apply seizure prevention agent to the bolts. Turn the turbocharger upside down. Install the turbine housing on the bearing housing, referring to the marks made during disassembly. Apply lube oil to the direct side thrust collar, then insert it onto the turbine rotor. Apply lube oil to the thrust bearing, then install it so it is aligned with the parallel pins. Check that the installation mark for the thrust bearing is at the top. Take care that it is not skewed after installation, or it might block the oil gallery. Apply lube oil to the distance piece and insert it. Apply lube oil to the anti-side thrust collar and insert it. Apply grease to the O-ring and install it onto the bearing housing groove. Fit it on neatly, taking care not to twist it. Insert the oil thrower into the compressor side sealing plate. Take care to point the end gap of the compressor side seal ring upwards. Match the sealing plate with the oil thrower to the alignment mark and install it in the bearing housing. Check the orientation of the punched arrow mark. Install the spring washer and hexagonal bolts. Apply grease to the rotor shaft. Match the impeller with the alignment mark and insert the impeller into the turbine rotor. Install the shaft end nut with a torque wrench. The nut has a left-hand thread, so turn it counterclockwise. The tightening torque is 32.4 Newton meters. Check that the installation position basically corresponds to the line marked during disassembly. If there is a large difference, you will have to reassemble it again. If the difference is small, tighten the nut with a torque wrench using the tightening torque specified in the table. Now measure the thrust clearance and the radial clearance of the turbine rotor. Measure in the same way as in disassembly. Check that the measurements are within the allowable range and enter the results on the record sheet. If the results deviate from the allowable range, reassemble again, keeping in mind the clearance values during disassembly. Measure the exhaust casing clearance. Check that the measurements are normal and enter the results on the record sheet. Compare the measurements with those made before disassembly to check that turbocharger cleaning was effective. Next is installation of the compressor housing. First, insert the O-ring between the bearing housing and compressor housing. Apply grease to the O-ring before inserting it. When installing the compressor housing, take care not to damage the compressor impeller. Align using the marks made before disassembly. Install the washers and the hexagonal bolts. Install the silencer. Turn the turbine wheel by hand to check that it turns lightly without any hitches or contact noise. That completes reassembly of the turbocharger. Next is installation of the turbocharger onto the engine. Set 2 new O-rings and 1 V-ring in the correct positions. The O-ring may be damaged when installing the turbocharger. Be sure to lower the turbocharger carefully. To make turbocharger installation easier, first set the installation footbolt. Don't forget to install the set bolt. Apply Molykote to the installation bolts to prevent seizure, and insert the packing. Then tighten the bolts. Check the flexible joint dimensions. Compare the measurements with those made before this inspection, and check that the values are almost identical. Enter the results on the record sheet. Test operate the engine and check that there is no air leakage, oil leakage, or abnormal sound. If everything is normal, install the cover. This completes disassembly servicing of the turbocharger.
I will explain the procedure for disassembly and maintenance of piston and connecting rod. Prepare the exclusive tools for disassembly of the piston. It starts from removing the piston. Leave the cylinder head open beforehand. Remove the protection ring before pulling out the piston. Turn the flywheel and set the piston at a position of about 80 to 90 degrees before TDC. Attach the liner supporting tool and spacer. Fix them with the tightening nuts of cylinder head. Place on the top of the piston the protection ring drawing out tool with the large diameter of taper part up. Remove the protection ring while turning the flywheel slowly. Remove the disassembling tools and the detached protection ring. Eliminate the carbon from the upper part of cylinder liner. Make a good condition in order to pull out the piston smoothly. Now, we proceed to the work for pulling out the piston. After putting the tap on the top of piston, screw the lifting eye bolt into the piston and stretch a wire. detach the cover of piston cooling chamber. Check and maintain the removed parts. Firstly, eliminate the carbon deposited on the outside of piston and the scale in cooling chamber. Secondly, check the piston by penetrate test for cracks on its top surface and ring groove. If any of them are found with abnormal state, change the parts. Measure the dimension of each piston part and of the piston pin according to the instruction manual. If any of them are used beyond the usage limit, change the parts. Check the connecting rod. Check first the contact and looseness in fit of piston pin metals. And also check the condition of crank pin metal. Check the contact on the rear and mating surface of each metal, and also check for seizure and embedded foreign matters on the sliding surface of each metal. Check for cracks, wear, and scratch on the serration mating surface of big end and bolts of connecting rod. To prevent the bolts from being broken due to fatigue, replace them about every 20,000 hours, even if their appearance is normal. Measure each part of the connecting rod according to the instruction manual. If any of them are used beyond the usage limit, change the parts. I will explain the procedure for angle tightening and stamping the set mark for the connecting rod bolt. The connecting rod bolts of this engine are tightened by angle tightening method. The mark indicating the specified angle, 120 degrees, and the set mark are stamped on the connecting rod and the connecting rod bolt respectively. When disassembling a connecting rod, make sure to re-stamp the set mark. Apply the lube oil and Protect grease to the connecting rod bolts. Install the metal cap while the crank pin metals are not fitted, and screw the bolt to its seating by hand. By using the torque wrench, tighten the bolt by the torque shown on the video. Stamp a temporary set mark on the side of the bolt collar, aligning with the set mark at the point A on the connecting rod. At this time, delete the old mark. Tighten until the set mark on the side of the bolt and B mark of the connecting rod are aligned. Stamp the set mark on the side of the bolt collar, aligning with the set mark at the point B on the connecting rod. After finishing the check and maintenance, exchange the necessary parts and assemble the piston and the connecting rod. Put the cover on the piston cooling chamber. At this time, fit its hole on the top of piston at the marking side, pump side. Renew the bolt and Belleville spring and then tighten them. Assemble the piston ring. Incorporate the oil ring with its coil joint shifted 180 degrees from its cut. Be careful not to mistake a setting order of second ring and top ring. Incorporate the piston rings with their marked sides facing upwards and their cuts shifted 120 degrees from those of adjacent rings. Incorporate the piston and the connecting rod while aligning their set marks to each other and inserting the piston pin. At this time, incorporate the piston pin circlip with its opening facing straight down. Set the crank pin metals on the connecting rod and metal cap. At this time, don't apply the lube oil on the rear of the crank pin metals. Screw the lifting eye bolt into the piston and lift it. Install the piston and the connecting rod into the engine. As the preparation, apply lube oil on the piston, cylinder liner, and crankshaft after installing the piston guide. Install the piston. At this time, align the set mark on the top of the piston with the fuel injection pump side. Insert the piston while tapping the piston with a resin hammer. Apply lube oil to the screw of connecting rod bolt and protect grease to the seating. Agree the set mark of metal cap with the set mark of connecting rod body. Fit the metal cap and then tighten the bolts. The connecting rod bolts are tightened by angle tightening method. Tighten the upper and lower bolts alternately in 3 steps to the punch mark confirmed in advance. After tightening, check the side motion of connecting rod. If it doesn't move, reassemble it. Finally, assemble the protection ring by hand. the hydraulic tool, relief valve of hydraulic pump to decrease the hydraulic pressure to 0 megapascals after all 4 tightening nuts are loosened. Screw the hydraulic jack in until it is stuck to the spacer and drain hydraulic fluid from jack completely. Remove the rubber hose and remove the hydraulic jack and the spacer. The tightening nut of cylinder head bolt can easily be removed by hand. Remove the nut with care not to damage the screw of cylinder head bolt. A leak of hydraulic fluid while using the hydraulic jack could lead to the spout of the fluid under high pressure and result in physical injury. Therefore, don't use the hydraulic jack with a rubber hose having a flaw or an oil-leaking portion. Furthermore, don't burn the outside of the rubber hose, and don't bring your face close to the jack or branch during the procedure. The cylinder head is removed by using the exclusive lifting tool. Firstly, fix the lifting tool to the tightening bolts of fuel valve. After fixing, put the crane and lift up vertically with care not to damage the screw of cylinder head bolt. After drawing the cylinder head, clean the carbon in the cylinder liner or at the top of the piston by the descaling agent. After cleaning, cover the cylinder so as not to allow dust and foreign matters to enter it. Remove the suction and exhaust valve supporter from the detached cylinder head. To remove the suction and exhaust valves, remove the valve rotators, cotters, and valve springs. Prepare the exclusive tools for removing. Firstly, fix the lifting tool of cylinder head to the tightening bolts of fuel valve by the drawing out tool B. Turn the handle clockwise after attaching the exclusive tool. Remove the cotter while holding valve rotator and valve spring. Turn the handle counterclockwise and release the compression of valve spring. After detaching the exclusive tool, remove the valve rotator and valve spring. Lay the cylinder head and draw out the suction and exhaust valve. Draw out the steam seal fitted in the valve rocker arm. At the same time, eliminate the carbon on the combustion surface. Check the combustion surface and the suction and exhaust valve by penetrate test for cracks.
Don't wanna overthink it. my appetite. Don't leave me here high and dry. Oh, but I don't wanna jinx it, baby. Let's not get ahead of my time. Oh, but I don't wanna miss you, baby. So I stand up and speak just my mind. Oh. You're chilling in the rain. You're some kind of butterfly. Baby, you give me midnight. You whip up my appetite. Don't leave me here high and dry. Baby, you give me ice and fire.
explain the overhaul procedure for main bearing metal and thrust metal. Prepare the hydraulic tool before overhauling the main bearing metal. Prepare the exclusive tool as you are watching in the video. Let's start the overhaul. Firstly, turn the flywheel and set the piston next to the main bearing at a position of 120 degrees before TDC. Install the spacer and hydraulic jack on the nut of main bearing bolt, and then attach the hydraulic tool in the same way of tightening nut of cylinder head. Secondly, detach the side bolt of main bearing that will be disassembled and then loosen the next bolts on both sides. Applying hydraulic pressure to the hydraulic jack and loosen the tightening nut of main bearing bolt. Close the relief valve of hydraulic pump and raise the hydraulic pressure to specified value. Insert the exclusive turning bar into the spacer notch, keeping specified hydraulic pressure, and then loosen the nut. After all two of tightening nuts are loosened, remove the hydraulic tool in the same procedure as tightening nut of cylinder head. After removing the hydraulic jack, loosen the cap nut of main bearing 2 or 3 turns and set the drawing out tool to the main bearing bolt and fix it by the bolt. Fit the drawing out bolt on the main bearing cap. Turn and draw out the nut. Remove the tightening nut of main bearing cap and install the holding tool to the bolt. Screw the circular nut into the holding bolt and fix it to the main bearing bolt to hold the main bearing cap. Place the necessary parts after checking and then assemble it. Incorporate each one of the upper and lower thrust metals of the frontal and rear parts at the respective former point, not mistaking one for the other. Match the print marking of upper metal to the cylinder block side and assemble it along the crankshaft. Mate the groove with the crankshaft side and incorporate the lower metal. Regarding the assembly of the main bearing, turn the flywheel to lower the oil hole in the crankshaft below the center of crankshaft. Direct the pawl of the upper metal toward the non-operating side and insert the upper metal along the crankshaft. Position the upper metal in the forward-backward direction so that its pawl will mate with the pawl hole in the cylinder block. Attach the inserting implement of upper metal to the main bearing cap. At this time, attach the implement, mating its one curved end with the outer periphery of a main bearing cap clamping bolt on the operating side and aligning the other step end with the inner periphery of main bearing cap. Fit the detaching attaching pin to the oil hole of crankshaft at non-operating side by the grease. Screw the circular nut to hold the main bearing cap until just before the inserting tool and the rear of metal will be touched. Turn the flywheel in a direction reverse to the direction of engine rotation. When the pawl of the metal has been aligned with the pawl hole in the crankshaft, continue turning the flywheel until the metal end aligns with the cylinder block end. Installation of upper metal will be completed. Loosen the circular nuts of holding tool to lower the main bearing cap. Remove the metal attaching detaching pin and metal inserting implement. Incorporate the lower metal to the cap. Afterwards, tighten the circular nuts of holding tool and remove the holding bolts. Fit the tightening nuts of main bearing cap and fasten them until its cap makes a close contact with the cylinder block. Tighten the side bolt on the non-operating side to half of the specified torque. Tighten the side bolt on the operating side to its seating by hand. Set the hydraulic jack to tightening nut of main bearing cap and fasten it by specified hydraulic pressure. Finally, tighten the bolts on non-operating and operating side by the specified torque. After overhauling the main bearing metal, measure the deflection of crankshaft and thrust clearance. I'll explain here how to measure the clearance of thrust. Fix the stand of dial gauge to the cylinder block and contact the dial gauge with crankshaft. Firstly, move the crankshaft to the front side and set the dial graduation on 0 point. Secondly, move it to the rear side and read the dial graduation. This value is the thrust clearance. Refer to the value of thrust clearance as you are watching in the video.